Welcome back to the last Code With Me video for Chapter 16 and for the book. If your screen looks a little different than mine, that's because I'm actually re-recording this video. The first time I recorded it, my recording software kind of messed up. I tried to go back and fix everything as best as possible, so if things are a little different, that's exactly why. The first thing we're doing is we're starting with Activity 16.8. This will allow us to create a mobile-friendly responsive navigation bar with pure CSS. Right now, if you notice, if you take the browser window itself and resize it to a point that it decreases to a mobile size, you notice that the navigation at the top disappears. As soon as you increase it to a certain point, the navigation reappears. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make it so that the navigation appears in a mobile-friendly environment. The first thing we're going to do is display the code for our CSS and edit the navul rule on line 794, in the 794 pixel media query to display the navbar. So we're going to go up here, and instead of display none, we're going to say display block, and save. The navbar displays, which is good. Let's just get it down to that point. And it displays, but it's wrapping across a couple of lines. Let's actually put this in mobile development mode so we can actually see, a more realistic standpoint. Responsive, good, okay, wrap. Mobile environments. So you can see that the navigation bar is actually wrapping around, and it's not exactly the best mobile-friendly use. So we're going to return to brackets, add a new rule under what we just did, right here, and say nav li, and that is also display block. Save, refresh, and now the navigation bar is top to bottom instead of next to each other. This kind of goes back to the way that the UL was originally designed, but, well, it's not exactly the best mobile-friendly environment because now we can't see the content behind the navigation. But we're going to work on that. I'm going to go back to brackets and add a new rule under that. Say nav A, border bottom, 000, solid, 2px. Display is block, and the min height is 45 pixels. Okay, save and refresh. And now our navigation items have a nice border below them, so we can actually see where the start of the navigation buttons are and the end of them. We're not done yet, so let's keep going. Return to brackets and add the new declaration to the navul rule. So right here, we're going to say width of 100%. Once you save and refresh, you notice that the items themselves now stretch across the whole window, which is basically what we wanted, making it easier for the mobile users to access the navigation and not be confused about endpoints. Alright, the next thing is we're going to create the trigger so that the navigation bar can actually be hidden and shown. We can do this with JavaScript. Instead, let's do it with just pure CSS so you have little advanced CSS under your belt. The first thing we're going to do is actually go to our HTML page, and right below the nav with role of navigation, so again the very top, we're going to add a label, and that label is for the nav checkbox. The ID of that is going to be nav trigger. We're going to list menu inside of that. Close the label. Inside that, we're going to have an input type equals checkbox, because basically we're just checking whether or not this checkbox is checked. That ID is nav checkbox, so basically the same thing the for value is above. Now we're not going to have anything else for this input type because, well, that's all it is. If we save, we refresh, you now see that we have a menu that is the label, and as soon as we click on it, the checkbox is checked. Not much fancy, but let's add the CSS to make it actually work. Alright, so we're going to go back to our CSS. We're going to add a rule under the nav rule that we just added. Nav rule on the navbar section, sorry. Navbar, main header, here we go, navbar. I'm going to add it under nav. this is going to be nav trigger, because again, we're putting this in the flow of the page. So background color is none, basically black, B-A-C-K, spell background right. Going to say color is white. Going to say cursor is pointer. Going to say display is block. Padding is 0.5 rem. And text align is center. Save, refresh. And now you can see that the label has now been stretched across the top and it has the word menu. It still checks the checkbox whenever we like it, and that's exactly what we want it to do. Next, we're going to hide and show the trigger and the narrow menu. So after the new rule, after the nav trigger rule, we're going to add something. Now this may seem a little weird, but trust me, just follow along. I'm going to say nav trigger and nav checkbox. And that's actually going to have a display of none, because as a default, we don't want this little menu item to show up. Additionally, we don't want the checkbox to show up on a standard desktop or laptop environment. So we come here, we save, go to the browser, refresh, and well, now it's gone. So if we increase the actual size, it's gone. If we decrease the size, it's gone. We need to add it back. So we need to make sure that the label only displays when the viewport is narrow enough to apply the rules in the 794 media box or media query. So we go down to the 794 media query, which is right here. And inside that, we're going to say, following the flow of the code, nav trigger display block. Now we're only doing this to the nav trigger. We don't need the checkbox to display. So we save, we refresh. Now we see the label is back up and going. It's clickable, which means that our checkbox is being checked and unchecked, but right now it doesn't do anything. So what we also need to do is we need to make the menu disappear. So nav ul, in this case, we're going to say none. Okay, so now our navigation has disappeared. So once we click on the menu, the navigation doesn't show up because we're not done just yet. The last thing we need to do is we need to add the trigger enabler. So we need to go back to this and we need to, right here. You just add it right here. So nav trigger, nav checkbox. We're going to use the pseudo class of checked, and then we're going to use the sibling selector, so plus ul, and that is display block. Now what happens here, even though the nav ul says display none right below it, this has more specificity because we're specifying the nav checkbox plus the ul. This is just a nav ul. So don't forget that IDs overrule standard element selectors. So in this case, as soon as our checkbox is checked, the navigation will show because it has a display of block, even though the default is display none. Let me show you what I mean. Save, refresh. Now it doesn't look like much is done, but if you click on menu, you'll notice that once we click, the checkbox is checked and our navigation shows up, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So check, 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 good. So once we increase the size of the browser window, you notice that the menu item actually disappears and our navigation reappears. But as soon as you decrease the size, menu appears, check, and our navigation shows up, which is exactly what we wanted to do. The last activity we're doing is introducing the fluid text. So go ahead and get a piece of paper going. I just have a nice little sticky item right here so that you can actually see what I'm working on instead of trying to figure out a piece of paper for me. And make sure this floats on top so you can see everything. The first thing we're going to do, and you can, you're more than welcome to write all this stuff down, but again, I just have a little sticky pad here to make it easy, is we need to determine the smallest font size. And that smallest font size we're actually going to find in the H1 near the top. Basically, every place that we have a VW, we're going to be replacing it. There we go, 6 VW. That smallest font size is going to be 36px. And in the sticky, I'm going to say page header h1 min equals 36. All right, the next one is the page header p. That's going to be 20px. And on our piece of paper, we say page header p min equals 20. Don't need to worry about units right now because all the units will be in pixels. Let's see. Scroll down to the edits main header 2. So we need the main section, main header h2, 4VW. That's going to be 20px. Again, on our piece of paper, or our virtual piece of paper, main header h2 min equals 20. Next, in the main header p, I'm going to state that as 18 pixels. Main header p min equals 18. And last but not least is the phone right here. We're going to change that to 24px. So we're going to say phone min equals 24. Now before I add any more, let's just save this and take a look at what we've actually done. So you notice that in the larger and the smaller resolutions, our font size, specifically like this right here, does not change. That's because that is the minimum size that we want to work with when it comes to actually dealing with something like this. Well, the other item we're going to do is we're actually going to determine and code the largest font size that we're willing to go, that we're wanting to make these things. So before we actually go through and start changing things up, we actually need to go to the very bottom. We're going to specify the largest font thresholds, and that specifically deals with thresholds. Don't have two H's in there. With a very large screen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to specify media screen and min width of 1200 pixels. Inside that, we're going to specify page header h1. Font size, and the largest we're going is 76px. And on our virtual piece of paper, we're going to say max equals 76px, or just 76. After that, we're going to say page header p, font size of 48px. So in here we say max equals 48. Below that, we're going to say main header h2, font size 48px, max equals 48. Could we combine those? We most certainly could. I may do that. Next is main header p, font size is 36px. So here we say max equals 36. And last but not least, we have phone, which has a font size of 48px. Max equals 48. So if we save all this, we refresh, you may notice that on your laptop screen in the mobile environment, not much has changed. We still have the standard size, but as soon as you increase the browser size, you notice that items such as the H2 have certainly increased in size. We decrease and it jumps down, we increase and it goes up. That's because my resolution is over 1200 pixels. If we go to the maximum size of 1640, it still has the size. But once we decrease it, you notice that the item jumps down. If for some reason your items are not increasing or are not having the exact output you would like, make sure this says minimum width, not maximum width. If you say min or maximum width, then it's going to only state this largest font size as long as the maximum width is within 1200 pixels. If you go beyond 1200 pixels, it's going to jump down. So make sure you say minimum, so that way it only goes into effect once the screen has reached a minimum width of 1200. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to add the fluid text. So we make sure we have our notes ready right here. We're going to go to the end of the footer P roll. Okay, footer P rule. Where is that? Footer P right here. About line 212-ish. Going to add a new comment and say fluid, FUAD, text starts at 320px, because that's where we're starting our fluid text at that resolution. So and media screen and min width of 320px. So we want 320px and higher. Inside that, we're going to say page header h1, and this is where the weird thing is going to come in. So font size calc, because yes, we're actually working with CSS to make it do math. If you think this is actually interesting, wait till you get to CSS variables. Those will save your life. But here's the funny part. Do you recall the formula from the lecture? We're actually going to be using the same formula and inputting our own numbers. So the formula is minimum plus maximum minus minimum times 100 VW minus the minimum resolution divided by the maximum resolution minus the minimum resolution. That sounds very confusing. So let's type it out and see what we're looking at. So the first thing is 36px. That's this right here. 36px plus parentheses 76 minus 36. You don't need units in this one. The 76 came from the max resolution, right, or max font right here, times parentheses 100 VW. That is 100 view width, which is basically the maximum size once you get the browser to the maximum view width, or in this case, the maximum width the viewport is willing to go. Minus the minimum resolution, so 320px, and yes, this one you do need units. That is divided by 1200 minus 320. Okay, let me add the parentheses back there. So that may seem a little confusing. Well, let's take a look at what happens. We save, we refresh, and you see that once the minimum resolution is at 1200, that's the maximum size that this wants to go. But as soon as you decrease the size below 1200, you notice that specifically this H1 right here is gradually going to decrease in size. Once it reaches 320 pixels, right there, you notice that it no longer decreases in size. The spacing may around it, but once it gets to 320, it starts to gradually grow, and that's exactly what we want it to do. That way, instead of just worrying about viewports and widths and stuff, this automatically takes care of the calculation to resize the information to fit the resized width. Okay, that's fun. Let's do it for the rest for the P, the H2, the P, and the phone class. So next we have page header P, font size calc, 20px plus 48 minus 20 times 100 VW minus 320 px divided by 1200 minus 320. Okay, well, instead of trying to figure out all this extra stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy and paste this a bunch of times, because what we're modifying is we're just modifying the rule declarations right here, and we're also just modifying the first three numbers. That's a P, so we're going to modify that, and then this is going to be the phone. So the first thing is we have the main header P2, I'm sorry, H2, We have 20 and 48, so that does not change. Can we group these together? We most certainly can. Come back to that. We have main header, P, calc of minimum is 18, max is 36, because we're using these numbers right here. And then minimum is 18 again. And last but not least, we have phone. And that is 24 right here. Max is 48, that's okay. And minimum is 24. All right, so save, refresh. And look at that, gradually decreasing to make sure that any resolution we have fits it perfectly. Good. All right, let me see, can we check the other items? My scrolling isn't working. Why is my scrolling working? My scroll bar isn't working. That's not good. Well, that is very weird. Scroll bar ain't working. Okay. Well, hopefully you are able to see and scroll with the items such as the main header and the P, the main header, the H2, and the phone class. For some reason, my scroll bar is not working. Without restarting the browser, I don't know what else to do. But hopefully you've learned quite a lot. If you try to validate this, chances are these parentheses will give you an issue. So if you want to, you can go ahead and correct these by just adding the actual numbers. Well, 48 minus 20 is what? 28. So in that case, we can just say 28. And 1200 minus 320 is, let's see, 1200 minus 300 is 900, and then 900 minus 20 is 880. So you can certainly do that in order to get around the CSS validation, because don't forget, the CSS validator has a bug that doesn't really like this system. So you can actually just add the numbers and you should be good to go. Well, that is it. That is the last Code With Me video for the chapter and for the book. Hopefully you've learned a lot in these Code With Me videos. I know they were a bit fun to make, and hopefully you learned something going along with me and, well, learning as I did. If you have any questions about this or anything in Chapter 16, please send me an email or hit me up on Twitter. I'll get back to you with the best possible answer. Next week, we have Unit 3 test, basically dealing with, well, everything we've learned up to this point.